All right. So how does this compare to previous years?
Well, so that $35.2 million budget, we just got the final figure on it. So what's happened in years past in Ross County is that a budget's been passed, and over the course of the year, appropriations have been increased. And so what you end up with at the end of the year is like a final budget figure. Okay, so last year, for example, and I had this right here because I was wanting to compare them, we started out with a budget of $31.6 million that was passed for 2023. We're going to end up with a budget of a little over $33 million. And so that's been kind of the trend. And I think that's pretty typical because what happens is you pass the initial plan. Over the course of the year, stuff comes up and adjustments have to be made. And so that's pretty common.
And it's always a guesstimate. Prices will rise, situations will happen.
Well, prices will rise, stuff will happen. You'll also have opportunities that come up. And so you want to be able to capitalize on opportunities if they come up. And so for whatever reason, over the course of a year, appropriations are increased to accommodate for those kind of things. One of the things that we've talked a lot about is trying to shift that focus to say, let's try to work within the budget that we're passing so that when changes need to be made, we can make those changes internally via transfers versus appropriation increases. And let's really try to govern to this figure, you know.
Transfers versus appropriations.
So an appropriation increase is when you have a budget of $100, let's say, and you increase it to $120 to accommodate whatever you have to do or whatever you choose to do. Whereas a transfer, let's say you have $100 in a line in the budget and you have a $120 need. Well, via a transfer, you can find money in another line that can be moved internally without increasing the overall size of the budget.
Okay, but you can enlarge the size of the budget only so far, then you run out of money, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible to appropriate beyond your ability, but we're not in any danger of that in Ross County. Ross County is doing very well financially, but the way to keep it that way is to say, okay, we want to work within the budget. And so let's say you have two lines, and one is a $100 appropriation, the other is a $100 appropriation, $200 appropriations, but in one of them you end up having a $120 need.
So you take from
That's right.
Rob and Peter to pay Paul.
In theory, yeah, but that has kind of a negative connotation. I'd characterize it more as like resource allocation. So if you only have an $80 need here and you have a $120 need over here, well, the easy way to solve that problem is to say, okay, we can adjust via a transfer rather than to increase this appropriation.
Money's not being used here, it's needed here, so you can...
That's right, yeah. And so that'll be a focus this year to the best of our ability. Because, the budget's passed, it's there. We know that it's not going to end up being what it is today because that's just the nature of things. You know what I mean? It's really hard to say exactly what we're going to spend money on over the next 12 months. But
it's all an educated guess.
Yeah, so you make projections. You estimate what revenue is going to come in. You estimate what expenses. Hey, Devin, you estimate what expenses you'll have, and so you project it. But then, I think the idea is over the course of the year, you govern to that document to the best of your ability. The easy thing is to say, well, we'll just increase the budget, but that's where spending growth comes from. If you have a budget and you focus on transfers instead of just increasing appropriations, you're kind of self-imposing the kind of discipline that'll keep the budget on track year over year over year.
So is the flow of money sort of normalized after the previous few years with COVID and everything?
Well, so the commissioners have done a really good job of keeping those funds separate. They have, and I can show you in this document, this is the fund summary. So one thing that the commissioners did when all of the federal ARPA money came in was that they set it up in a separate account. And so this started, I think, is around a $14 million line. They've spent a lot of the ARPA money, but they've held back, as you can see, $10.6 million approximately. And so this money has been kept outside of the general fund because, number one, there are strings attached with how we spend it and how we track it and have to report it to the federal government. But number two, the commissioners were really smart, I think, to not want to just fritter it away, because that would have been probably pretty easy to do. You know, you get a $14 million lump sum, and it's like everyone has ideas on what to do with it.
Yeah.
You know
So
what I
you
mean?
sequester it in a separate bank account to try to hide it from yourself. So you.
Well, yeah. So it's all under the county's supervision, of course. But by keeping it separate, what the commissioners have done has been really intentional about, hey, we're going to consider ways to use this. We'll use it when the time is right, when we know exactly what we want to do with it. And we're in a position now where we've got $10.6 million set aside that's separate from the general fund, that's still usable for whatever purposes they decide on.
But would you say things are sort of normal? You don't expect massive inflation or all the bridges to fall into the creeks or anything,
Yeah.
any high strangeness this year?
No, I mean, it's, all you can do is project to the best of your ability. But as far as what we see here in Ross County, we are cash rich. We know what we want to spend on this year, at least for the time being. You know, there might be opportunities that come up. There might be challenges that come up. But if those come up, we have the ability to address those in this budget because of the county's strong financial position. And when you think about just the general economy, we've experienced high inflation over the last few years, but that seems to have kind of moderated at least. The question is, how do we deal with the higher baseline of costs versus where we were 3 years ago, for example?
Yeah.
I don't see costs going back down. I see costs flattening, at least based on what we see now. But what that means is that we have a new baseline. And so, you kind of spend in a disciplined way, knowing that things could change. And because of that, and because of the way business has been done here in Ross County in years past, we're going to have the ability to do whatever we might need to do in 2024.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how long did it take to go through all these numbers and formulate this plan?
Yeah, well, it started over the summer. It's in June. We get initial requests from all of the agencies and departments.
And does the county need to do a tax budget in midsummer like the city does?
Yeah. So it's really over the course of about 7 months that we do this. But we receive all the requests. We make our projections. We kind of digest it, analyze, continue to track. And then it was in November that we got back for kind of the second round of sit-downs with all the elected officials and agencies and departments and said, okay, here's what you requested. Are any changes needed? We made changes as they were requested in that second round. And then for our part here in the auditor's office, working with the commissioners, it was a matter of once we had gone through that second inspection of requests, then it was time to trim. We started with $36.7 million in requests. The commissioners knew they didn't want to spend that much, and I applauded them for that because I knew I didn't want to see that happen. So we worked together with the commissioners to identify opportunities to cut. And when the time came, we would communicate with the other elected officials and say, hey, what do you think about this? And we were able to cut, I think it ended up being like $1.7 million out of it to produce a balanced budget. We don't project to spend more than we'll take in next year, so that's good. That's a truly balanced budget.
You want a ideal carryover from year to year. Not too big, not too small.
Well, not so much that you have a dollar figure in mind. The biggest thing is just to make sure that you don't plan to spend more than you'll take in.
Yeah.
Right? So the first job and the first responsibility is to make sure that we're matching expenses to revenue. And then when we're able, try to produce a surplus. This budget, we're going to carry over $17.7 million in cash in the general fund from 23 to 24.
That sounds like a lot. That's
it
half
is a
of
lot.
what you're.
It's huge. Yeah, it's huge. Ross County financially is about as strong as it probably ever has been, at least in a generation, I'd say.
Even after the COVID years.
Yeah, and what's really remarkable about it is that, I was mentioning earlier that Ross County has kept the COVID funds separate. that $17.7 million cash carryover in the general fund does not include ARPA dollars, which is that additional $10.6 million I was talking about. So Ross County's, on one hand fortunate, but on the other hand, it's really been kind of intentional. The commissioners have been very good about fiscal discipline, and that's to their credit. But now it's our job to maintain that. So we start 2024 from a very strong position, and we will maintain it by continuing to watch what we spend on and spending wisely, and just kind of address what comes as it does.
All right. So if anyone wants to learn more or be in contact with your office, how can they do that?
Yeah, so we posted PDFs, both of the budget summary and the appropriations, on the auditor's website, auditor.rosscountyohio.gov. Send me an email, Jeff Lehner at rosscountyohio.gov, or call the office, 740-702-3080. And I know the commissioners would be happy to answer questions too. You got to contact them separate from our office. But just everything we can do to make it transparent and accessible, and make sure that people know what they want to know about what we're doing with their money.